I'm Max Dunlop and welcome to SANDEMANs Live. Today we're going to be exploring the Berlin Wall Memorial Site. You know, a lot of the time when we talk about history, whether it's in books and class or movies, we get it from the point of view of the world leaders, from the people in charge. We're going to be talking about the Cold War today, and whenever I read about it, you always hear about Kennedy, Khrushchev, Reagan, and Gorbachev. Today I want to try to do something a little bit different. We're going to tell the history of the wall, tell the history of the Cold War from the point of view of regular, everyday people, the folks that lived in houses right next to it, and how it affected their life. But before we get into that, let me tell you a little bit about my life, my story. I said my name's Max Dunlop. I'm from the United States. I grew up in Connecticut, about 45 minutes outside of New York City, and I went to university in Boston, the Art Institute of Boston. I studied fine arts, painting, and art history. And when I graduated back in 2005, I moved to New York City when I was done. And there I fell in love, met my wife, and we got married. We're about to have our 10th wedding anniversary this March. Time goes by fast. In 2016, we moved here to Berlin. This is the city that we chose to start a family. I got two little girls now, Frida and Claire. Hello to my little ladies if you guys are watching this back home. But when I was growing up in the 90s, I had a cousin that we would visit most summers, lived in Ohio. His name was Johnny Green. He's about 15 years older than me. And I always thought the most fascinating stuff was when he would tell me stories when he was in the Army, in the U.S. Army. Now, he was enlisted from 1983 to 1989 during the Cold War, and he was stationed right here in Germany. The stuff I thought was most fascinating was when he would tell me stories about when he would come into Berlin, when the wall was up, what it was like to be there in the Army during the Cold War and seeing the Berlin Wall, the Soviet, the French, the American, the British soldiers all standing around. Yeah, at this point in the 90s, the wall had come down, but the communists were still the bad guys in all the action movies. And to me, he was like an action star. He brought history to life. It wasn't a class, it wasn't a book. This stuff was real, it really happened, and it really happened to actual people. That's what we're trying to do today, is bring history to life by telling the stories of real people. Let me explain what we do here. If anybody has seen any of these live streaming tours before, give a big thumbs up in the comments. Thanks for having you back. And for anybody new, let's explain how it works. This is a free live streaming walking tour. We are live from Berlin right now. Like I said, it's free. You don't have to spend anything at all. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. Doesn't matter how much money you have. Everybody's welcome to join us. There is a donations button below if you want to give money. That's incredibly terrific, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. But if you want to help, the most important thing you can do is click the subscribe button. Put in your email address so we can tell you all the big events we have coming up. We got guides in cities all over Europe, bringing tours almost every day at this point. And click that little share button down below. Tell your friends and your family, let people know what we're doing here. Let me tell you what we're gonna do today. Behind me is a map of the city. Right where we are, I'll show you there's a point. This spot right here is where we're standing. And these two lines and the space in between, that was the Cold War border, the wall and what they called the death strip, where you would be shot for standing. That's what it became in the 70s and 80s. That's what it wound up being. The very first day, it was just barbed wire thrown on the sidewalk. I'm not gonna go way in depth about why there was a wall or how the politics of all that happened. I did a video a couple weeks ago. We went down to Checkpoint Charlie and I went pretty in depth into that. That video's on the YouTube channel. When we're done here today, I recommend go and check that out if you're curious. But mostly they built the wall. You can see this is the line of where it was here. They built this because the East Germans were constantly trying to escape. Millions of people. They say from 1945 till 1961, 1 out of every 6 East Germans gets out. Now here, where they built the line, the apartment buildings were here, the sidewalk was the west. When you opened your front door and stepped out into the street, you left the east and went into the west. That was illegal starting August 13th, 1961. And you can see none of those apartment buildings are here anymore. Those were all torn down as year by year, month by month, they expanded the no man's land, the death strip. Now this Bernd-Strasse, the street we're standing on right now, the East German government referred to as the focal point of escape attempts. Because the houses were right next to the border, all you had to do was hop out your window and you were free. So in the first 3 months of the wall being up, over 150 people escaped from right here, this street that we're standing on. So the East German government had to figure out a way to stop people from getting out. Now right here, where the wall came through, this was a street that dead-ended, that got cut off by the wall. It's called Bergstrasse. You can just make out the remnants of the curb. You see that there on the left and the right, the road? Over 300 streets were cut off, hit a dead end when the wall went up in 1961. And every single one of those streets, now you can drive through when the wall came down, except for the street we're standing on right now, because of this memorial site. As we look into this sort of historic box, you see those old bricks? That's the old curb of the 200-year-old street. And underneath the glass, those rebar coming out of the tube, that's from the street lights, from the flood lamps that the East Germans put up. Originally, the East Germans in the death strip, the communists put the lights right next to the wall. Remember, the sidewalk was the west. So all these West Germans would come up with bricks, with BB guns, and they would break all the light bulbs. So later on, they moved the lights further back to keep them safe. But I'd like to tell you a story now about a woman who used to live in an apartment that was right here. Her name was Eda Siekman. She was born in 1902. 1902, think about that. Think about her life. She's born under Kaiser Wilhelm II. Germany is an empire. People are riding horses down the streets. She's a teenager in the First World War. She lives through the Spanish flu, the pandemic, the influenza, the Great Depression. Electricity comes to the city. And then the Nazi regime takes over in the financial crisis. She lives through 12 years of Adolf Hitler, the Second World War and the Allied bombings. She survives all of that. And then in 1961, she's a 58-year-old woman living by herself in an apartment building right here. And one night, they put a wall up in front of her house. And on the 18th of August, they hammer boards over her front door. They start putting bricks over her windows. Here's a photograph of Eda here. What it must have been like to have these police officers, these guards stationed in the hallway, triggering those memories of the SS and the Nazis just a few years before. Terrified, desperate to get out to meet her sister who lived a few blocks away in the west. She throws her mattress out her third-story window and jumps. She doesn't make it. She loses her life. We're looking at a memorial called the windows of those who passed. This is to remember the 136 people who lost their lives trying to escape from the east into the west, desperate to get out to find a better life. Now the numbers are probably much higher than that. I've read accounts, new research projects have come to anywhere from 300 to 400 people. Now most people didn't die or escape. Most people, oh, I got a little dog coming up to get me. Hello there. You never know. You never know who you're going to meet out here. Most people were detained. Most people were arrested trying to get out. Over 250,000 people got arrested. We're looking at behind me a cemetery, because for almost 200 years, this has been a place where people came to remember those who passed away. This memorial we saw, the windows, it's incredibly fitting that it was placed here on top of this old cemetery. When the East Germans built the death strip, extended the border, they moved over 1,000 graves. Over 1,000 graves were dug up. Originally, the cemetery wall was used as the Berlin Wall itself. But now all that's left is a memorial to remember the mass graves of the people that died during the Allied bombings of the Second World War. Those were the graves that weren't moved. We don't know exactly how many people there are, but here is a cross, because this is where, thousands of people that lived in this neighborhood were buried. When there is a war, the people that suffer, the people that lose their lives, are the everyday people. In the Second World War, over 55 million civilians, 55 million people lost their lives as innocent bystanders to that war. Now, when this wall went up, right away, nobody was allowed to cross back and forth. They're trying to keep the East Germans from escaping, remember. But people on the West couldn't get through either to see their friends, their family members, or their loved ones. But in 1963, 2 years after the wall is up, that starts to change a little bit. The East German government would hand out temporary Christmas visas to West Germans. So for the holidays, you could come and visit. Here we can take a look at an original piece of the wall. It was designed to keep people apart. Now has little kids rolling their scooters and riding their bikes along it. Well, the Christmas visas got extended through 64 into 65, all the way up till 1971. In 1971, they really started to loosen things up a bit. If you were West German, after 71, you could get a permit to go in and visit the East any time of the year to see friends, family members, or loved ones. Now, in the 70s, a good family friend of ours, growing up, a man named Detlef Olzog, had been desperate to escape. He was an engineer, and he gets out. He leaves East Berlin into West Berlin. From there, he gets to West Germany, and from there, he gets to the United States. He moves a couple houses down the street from me, and his daughter, Martina, wound up being my daughter's best friend. We're gonna head down in here to see the most intact version of the final wall, the death strips and the guard towers, the last preserved bit in all of Berlin. But when my sister and Martina were growing up, we would go on family vacations together. She would come out to my uncle's farm in Oregon. My dad would always tell my uncles, do you know her father escaped from East Germany? He climbed over the wall, and everyone would be stunned. You know, this history, it wasn't just about world leaders, it was about regular people that we met. I'd like to tell you a story about one of those people now. His name was Bernd Lünser. Bernd Lünser was a university student. When the wall goes up in 61, he's 22 years old. He lives in the East, where we're standing, and he went to school in the West, just the other side of the road. This was pretty common back then in the 50s for people to live on one side, go to school in the other, live on one side, work in the other. But the wall goes up, he can't go back to class. All his friends are there, his future is there. They've told him his future cannot happen. So he's trying to get a permit so he can go to school. He can't get one. Classes are bound to start in October, and by the beginning of October, he realizes he has no chance, and he's desperate. So on October 4th, a couple of blocks away, he climbs up on a rooftop, has to go back from the border because he doesn't want to get caught. And there he jumps rooftop to rooftop, sort of like Spider-Man, as he runs along the way. You know, we can see what this became with the guard tower up here, where the East German guards would have stood with their machine guns. But they're not there yet. At this point, this is all just apartment buildings. And he's running on the rooftops, gets to the sidewalk, and he yells off the top, help me, I'm going to jump. And the West Germans on the sidewalk go and get the fire department. They're ready. Remember, I told you, over 150 people escaped in the first 3 months just on this street. So the fire department comes out to the sidewalk with big nets telling him, jump, we'll catch you in the net. But an East German guard spots him. An East German guard sees him trying to escape, runs over, and they get in an altercation. They get in a wrestling match on the rooftop. The fire department's yelling, jump, jump. The East German guard pulls out his gun, starts shooting at him. the West German police down below, they start shooting back up at the East Germans. There's people on both sides shooting guns, and Bernd leaps to his life. He doesn't make it. He dies instantaneously. But a West German police officer shooting back on the roof hits the East German guard in the leg. The East German guard gets shot. Now the next day in the news, there are two completely different versions of this story, as you can imagine. In the West, they say that Bernd was this university student. They interview his professors, say what a great student he was, how popular he was, how everyone loved this guy. He's just trying to go back to school. And in the East, they say he's a nefarious criminal, a leader of the underworld. And the West Germans were firing their guns trying to kill the East. Now the people that live on both sides really believe the stories that they're being fed. And this division gets more. We're going to head across the street here and see what the wall was really like at the end, as it developed through time. You know, because as this division was happening in the press, the division was physically happening as the death strip and the no man land was growing. In 1974, they tear down the whole wall and they start coming up with the best ways to keep people from escaping. They get professional athletes, professional East German athletes to come. What's the hardest wall to climb? What's the furthest distance to jump to make sure nobody can get out? Here we have a few photographs that run through a little bit of the timeline. 1963, you can see they're developing the cement wall with barbed wire up on the top. And then if you look in the second picture, you can see the apartment buildings have bricks in the windows. They emptied everybody out. They turned the houses themselves into the wall. And then finally here in the third picture, you saw what it was at the end. Thousands of people get relocated from their homes. They tear down the buildings and they built this no man's land with this series of walls. I'm going to show you now what you would have had to do if you wanted to escape from East Berlin, let's say 1985. The first thing you do is you have to climb over the inner wall. You get over one wall with barbed wire. It's a good first step. But then it's a signal wire. You touch this and an electronic signal goes to the guard tower we just saw. And now the guards with machine guns, well, now they know you're down here. You get past that and it's tank traps, giant pieces of steel that were twisted up to stop any vehicles from getting through if somehow you got in here with a car or a truck. Past that and it's just raked sand so that you would leave footprints. The guards in the guard tower looking down, you live in the same town. What if they know you? What if it was their friend? What if you were related? What if it was your cousin? Now they have to shoot because they will be caught. They'll be an accomplice if there's footprints and there's no body. Then there were guard dogs, big runs of guard dogs to get past. And finally, a trench that you would have to climb through, a deep hole. And after that, a huge 13-foot wall with huge cement tubes. And finally, you made it into the West. You escaped. Now we can see up here, there's a giant photograph of 1961. Remember, that's the year the wall was built. These children on both sides, family members, everyone's coming, standing around, watching the wall go up. And every few years, that wall would be expanded, more buildings would be torn down, the death strip would get worse. And every time more security was put in, people got more and more hopeless. But there was one symbol of hope in the middle of the no man's land. And we can see that right here in this photograph. That was the Reconciliation Church. You see this here? A church sitting all by itself in the middle of the death strip. This had all been apartment buildings, but they tore them down. The church that remained, it made people think that the wall was just temporary. They got to be keeping this church up because at some point they're going to tear the wall down. They're saving this because they know this division is not permanent. Well, those hopes were crushed in 1985 when the East Germans filled that church that used to be right here. They filled that church with explosives and they leveled the building. So when the wall comes down, just 4 years later, they were 4 years away from making it. When a wall comes down in '89, the members of that church community had a lot of decisions to make. What were they going to do to remember this place, to remember this site? just here, we can see that they made a farm. They plowed the earth, and they planted rye. They say where you can sow, you can have peace. You get life. You get food from the earth. They turn the death strip really into the life strip. And they rebuilt the church in this modernist design. You can see the wooden slats on the outside, and in between them is this sort of minimalist, modern clay church where they have services every Sunday. There was one just a few hours ago. And if we can get in here and just see those bricks a little bit, you see how they're full of the old stones and glass, the rubble in the clay? That rubble is the actual church that was destroyed by the East Germans in 1985. But we'll head over here and see an incredibly powerful memorial sculpture. Now, in Coventry, England, there was a church that was destroyed by the Nazi military in the bombings of England. Now, they didn't restore it. They kept it with the damage there as a reminder of the war, as a memorial for the war. But the Coventry Church in England had this statue made of the man and the woman coming together, hugging, embracing, the statue of reconciliation with the holy book surrounded by barbed wire below it. And they sent it here as a way for the two sides to join together, to recover. This isn't the only one. They also sent one of these statues to Hiroshima in Japan, so the world can start to recover after the horrific crimes of the 1940s. The only thing that's left that remains of the old church are the old church bells, and they're right here inside these wooden slats. Can you see in there? These 3 old church bells from 1894. There's a big crank on the side, and on the hour they still come up and ring these church bells. And you can see right here at my feet this metal line. This is where the old church used to stand, the church that was destroyed by the communists in 1985. I'm going to tell you a story now about a man who's a lot like Bernd Lünser, the fellow we talked about before. His name is Joachim Neumann. Now, Joachim Neumann was an engineering university student, same age, same major. He's 22 years old in 1961. He lives in the East, and he wants to get to the West. And some friends of his give him a fake Swiss passport and a couple of Swiss, he gets like a movie ticket, some Swiss souvenirs so he can get through the checkpoint. You can see we're headed right up here to what's left of one of the old apartment buildings that used to be in this block. But Joachim gets to the checkpoint at the Friedrichstrasse train station and realizes he doesn't speak Swiss. Realizes they're going to know that he's East German if they ask him any questions. So at the last minute, he realizes, I have to have a plan. I'm just going to pretend to be an arrogant Swiss tourist. So he just shrugs his shoulders and snuffs and doesn't answer any questions, just seems angry to be there, and it works. At the Friedrichstrasse checkpoint, the East German border guards wave him through to the West. He's escaped, he's out. But like many people that escaped, he wasn't done, because his girlfriend is still in the East. He wants to get her out. Loved ones, family members, people would continue to go back to help other people escape. Let's take a look while we're here at these red bricks, the foundations of one of the houses that used to stand here. So in 1961, when they first built the wall, 13th of August, first there's guards standing on your front door. The 18th is a few days later. They board up your front door, they brick up your windows, and they make a new door in the back of your apartment building. They put guards on your staircases, in your hallways, and everybody that lived there is followed 24 hours a day. Remember, for the older people, this brings back all the memories of the SS and the Nazi regime. The fear is creeping up. If people didn't want to leave before the wall, they definitely want to leave after the wall. And our guy, Joachim Neumann, has gotten out, but he wants to get his girlfriend out. He's at the technical university in the West and starts meeting other people. What can they do to help other people escape? Here's some photographs here on the wall that show a series of these escapes. You see, most of them say 1961, because at the very beginning, there's no wall. They're just jumping out of the windows of the apartment buildings, climbing down with ropes. The fire department's out there with the nets. In 77, they're there talking where they escaped from. The woman getting arrested, like I said, most people didn't get out. Over 250,000 people are arrested and detained trying to escape. Well, Joachim meets his friends and they start building a tunnel underneath the wall. But the informants, they're tipped off by a rat, by a snitch, and his girlfriend gets arrested and goes to jail. So the next year he tries again. She's in jail for 18 months, and him with a whole group of students right where we're standing. If you look down, you see these marks on the ground. This is where their tunnel was. On the west, a few blocks away, in an abandoned bakery, they dig 12 meters down. They dig 150 meters underneath the wall. Now they don't know where they're going to come up. They start digging to the surface. They could come up right underneath some border guards playing cards somewhere. But fortunately, they come up in an abandoned coal shack behind an apartment building. And on the first night, on October 3rd, they get a bunch of people out. They get dozens of people out. And Joachim goes back to his apartment to rest, to get ready to help more people get out through the tunnel. And when he gets home that day, there's a letter from his girlfriend, Krista, who was supposed to be in jail. And she says she's been released early. It's just a coincidence that he gets this letter on the day that they're breaking people out. So he says, we got to find her. We got to get her out. Send message. This is 1964. There's no cell phones. He can't send a text message. So he's trying to send signal over to her. He doesn't know if she got it. And he's hoping that he'll find her. That night, he's in the tunnel. He's the one who's greeting people coming in. And bit by bit, as people come through, oh, let me just interrupt the story one time, because this is an amazing photograph. One of the most common groups of people to escape were border guards themselves. You know that your wall isn't working when the people that are escaping the most are the people that are supposed to be working there. As we run through the final few stages of this story, we'll do it by looking at these photographs that really illustrate it. And we're almost done here. This is going to be our final stop. So Eingang, where it says it up there, that's the entrance. That's where people would have gone into the tunnel. They sent the code word that people going to escape would come down to this street corner and would say the word Tokyo, the secret code word. And if there were East German students that were helping people escape that knew the code word, they would bring you to the tunnel. As we see the next photograph, it was just barely the size of a human being, the tunnel, trying to escape. It took 5 months to dig. And in the next photograph, we can see people being lowered down into the tunnel. And then on the other side, people escaping. Now, one of the last people to get out that night, on October 4th, 1964, is Krista and Joachim Neumann meeting each other. Happily, big smiles on their face. She made it. They got married. They lived the whole rest of their lives together. He became an engineer. He spent the whole rest of his life building, you can guess it, tunnels. He specialized in building tunnels. He was actually a supervisor. The biggest project he worked on was the tunnel that went under the English Channel. So he built some of the most famous tunnels in the history of the world, whether it was Tunnel 57, here helping 57 people escape, or the English Channel Tunnel. Well, we're just wrapping it up today. I had so much fun hanging out with you. This wall was a place that was designed to keep people apart, and now it's a place as a memorial that brings people together. Like I said, I'm so happy we got a chance to be together today. I'm a little embarrassed to say it, but I have to let you know that this is how we all make our living, and the only way we make any money to continue to bring you these tours from all over the world is if you click that donations button just below the video. Anything you can offer makes a huge difference, not just to me personally, but to the whole rest of the team on the other side of the camera. Like I said, we rely entirely on your donations to keep these videos going. And if you can't afford to give, look, you don't have to tell me. I understand. I work in the tourist industry. We've been hit by this thing as hard as anybody else. Just click that share button. Subscribe and click that share button. Help us spread the word on this. Help people know what we're doing here. Well, we're just about to leave the east and the death strip now and step into the west. And as I leave and step into West Berlin, I'd like to say thanks for coming. From Berlin, Germany, I'm Max Dunlop, signing out.